Thank you. Okay, so tonight we are assembled for a particular topic around, it's called Publish or Perish. The idea that the stakes are very high when you're doing spiritual life story writing and you're writing from your own life. People often have an extra burden of vulnerability or layer of vulnerability. So we want to talk about some of the pragmatics around that. I'll talk about some of the practical aspects of that. And my guest will talk about it, share her phenomenal story and some really interesting self-care perspectives. But first, let me say that if you're viewing this live or if you're viewing this as a recording, we talk about in this session life writing as an integrative genre that unites memory and experience. Spiritual life writing, which is what we're here to talk about, invites the whole self in. Memory and experience, fact, feeling, and imagination, the profane and the sacred. So we offer these sessions to help you find your authentic voice and to shed whatever fears make you hold your tongue. And, as we know, there are lots of barriers to publishing. So the holding your tongue part is pretty typical. Going public with your story is not for the faint of heart. And people who are tackling their own spiritual lives in particular, and whatever that heritage is, or that baggage is, or that experimentation is, needs particular support. And we'll explore what those are and how to move your work into the public sphere with some confidence. Tonight's session, I will introduce my guest. We'll chat for a bit. We'll share some resources, and then there'll be a 10-minute writing exercise. So make sure you have your pen and paper with you. So I'm very honored to introduce my guest this evening, somebody whom I also call my friend, really remarkable person. Meharoona Ghani is a former artist in residence at the University of Victoria's Centre for Studies on Religion and Society. She's a diversity and inclusion specialist, possibly also a diversion specialist, we'll get to that, and a writer anthologized in many collections, including Body and Soul and The Muslimah Who Fell to Earth. She was shortlisted for the Federation of BC Writers 2021 Literary Contest and will appear in their forthcoming anthology. Meharoona continues to write Letters to Rumi, her autobiographical journey on identity and belonging. And we're going to talk about her work tonight. And I encourage all of you, if you haven't already, to take a look at Body and Soul. This is the book this is how I met Meharoona to begin with. We met through her writing. Why don't you go ahead and unmute and we can chat. We'll be able to chat. That would be great.
There we go. Hello.
Hello. So we met through your writing. So we met in a very intimate way because I have to say it's very intimate because the piece you wrote for me for the anthology that I was putting together is titled, I don't know if people can see that.
Yep.
My uterus is a tree. Okay, can you see that? My uterus is a tree. Now I can tell you, Meharoona, not every editor would be ecstatic to see that that was the title of the piece that someone has handed to them. My uterus is a tree. Okay, I could have turned and fled right at that moment in time, but I wanted to lean in because I was intrigued that someone would go to that place, go to that depth right away, and be able to talk about that work. So thank you for the gift of that piece and for that introduction to you. It's been a few years now since we've had the chance to first work together. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to be here with you, Susan, and with everybody who's joined in. And I really appreciate the invitation and all those beautiful words you said. And I'd also like to thank Awakening Spirituality for hosting and the tech support is always so critical and important. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm on the traditional territory of the Algonquin peoples, which includes the Songhees, the Esquimalt, and the Wasanich, which is now colonially known as Victoria, British Columbia, is where I'm joining you from.
Beautiful. So we are both in water-oriented places. You're on an island, I mean, the Great Lakes Basin. I always think it's beautiful just to remember that the water is right around us, and it feels like the right element for us to talk about this kind of work.
Yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
I don't know how the weather is there where you are. It's really warm and hot here and dry.
Yes, so not that way here. So not hot and dry here. No, we're just the opposite. But anyway, I'm glad you're in a good place. So tell us a bit about tell us about Letters to Rumi, what that is, that collection is that you're working on, and why this whole topic of self-care matters to you. We'll get to that in the slides and talk about the resources, but or let me back up for a sec. Why does the concept of spiritual memoir and spiritual writing matter to you? Because I know you, like me, you're a real advocate for it, right? Like you will champion that as something that we need to own and something that we need to do. So just talk about
that. Why Letters to Rumi? I started writing. It's such a big question because there's so many layers for me on that. The spiritual memoir, life writing is such a beautiful category. It seems very open to me, something that there aren't any boundaries within it for some reason. I don't know why. I feel it's just a space that I can kind of delve into as somebody who has been and is on a spiritual journey of some sort. And why Letters to Rumi, and this kind of ties into that. Why I was looking for somebody to write to. It was Ann Landers, actually, back in 2012. And I started writing a Dear Ann letter. And as I started writing, I thought, is she really going to get my space of in between? And of in between means my hybrid identity. Yeah. And I'm born and raised in Canada, but I also have many other layers of identity: cultural, religion, class, disability. I'm a disabled person. So there's a number of layers in that. And as I started writing Dear Ann, I scrapped it. I was like, she's not going to get it. And so I just searched on Facebook, of all places, and I came across a Facebook page, which was a collection of Rumi's quotes, and with beautiful artwork. And I just started following that and not knowing about algorithms of Facebook or anything. I had no idea. And I started following this, and I would get these posts every day. And I thought, oh my goodness, somebody's sending me something. So I started writing back to these posts, these quotes. And as I started writing, it turned into these, I started to get responses from people who follow me, saying they felt a connection to what I was writing. And it just dawned on me, that's my book. And I started writing Letters to Rumi. And what I was doing also was in my world of spirituality, I was also in between. I'm in this in between space of what does religion, the structure and the definition of religion really mean for me as a Muslim person. And there's a lot of anger. I'm being quite honest, there's anger around how religion has been abused or misused within the context of what I'm writing and working on. And has some of that has to do with patriarchy and power and privilege, and has controlled women and women's bodies in different ways. And so I always wanted to just talk to some, like, I'm going to say quote unquote imam, a spiritual leader within the Muslim tradition, but I've never met anybody that I found comfortable to speak with about these things that are in my mind. And then I found Rumi. And So Rumi's work seemed to connect to me in a way that I could write to him. Now, that journey has been a long journey. Since 2012 was when I started writing. And it's evolved in terms of what that Rumi looks like for me now. But for me, spirituality is much more open than religion, because I think religion, the definition of religion can be, it's different. There's so many structures within that. And I could just go on in so many ways.
No, this is really good. This is really good.
Okay. So spiritual, it seems open.
Okay, so and for folks who don't automatically, I think this crowd would all know who Rumi is, but Rumi, like Anne Landers, has been gone for some time now. So, you know, in a way, it's really, I didn't know the Anne Landers story. That's priceless. I just love it. I would love to have seen like the 75-word letter that you sent to Anne Landers or whatever, however they would have cropped it down to. Would they have, would the word hybridity have been, even, has it ever appeared in an Anne Landers column? Probably not, but I'm sorry we missed the chance to see your
I scrapped it. I threw it out. I didn't send it.
Oh, that's fantastic. Okay, so regardless, Rumi's been gone for a long time, a few centuries now. So your conversations with Rumi, okay, and you're building, is it fair to say, for just so people can understand, you're building your spiritual memoir out of this collection of letters to Rumi, and any given chapter is a hybrid. It has poetry, it has reflection, and you're processing all kinds of things: body, culture, identity, belonging, religion, sexuality. Even in this chapter, for me, all of that stuff, all of that is in there. We're just woven through beautifully. Okay, and that's given you, so this Rumi, would you say, is kind of like a sounding board? That's okay, so you can develop all of that in a really rich, interesting way.
Yeah, Rumi is a sounding board, and Rumi is also, there's so many, Rumi is a metaphor, and is a metaphor also. Rumi could be, I often get asked, who is Rumi? Am I leaving my religion? Is Rumi me? Is Rumi real? Is Rumi alive? Is Rumi dead? Is Rumi a man or a woman? Like all these, when I do readings, these questions come forward, and my poet self often says, maybe, maybe not. And I don't answer, because Rumi to me can be any of those things. However, on paper, I know who Rumi is. Rumi is, Jalaluddin Rumi is actually an imam, and a lot of people in sort of the Western world, I will say, don't realize he's a Muslim scholar. He's an imam. He knows, he's a scholar of Islam and the Quran. So my being in the fellowship, I was in the as an artist in resident, part of my work in terms of the writing was to delve into reading an English translation of the Quran, because I don't speak Persian or Arabic. So reading the Quran, and again, many different translations, was the other goal for me, has been the goal. Mm-hmm. Once I read those things, Rumi made sense in terms of the parables that he writes. Yeah. His Masnavi is a 6-volume collection, and it's one of the critical pieces of his work. And I found an author named Javed Mojaddadi, who it took me years to find. I found him in 2017. He's a Persian-speaking author, writer, scholar who translated Rumi's Masnavi as close to English as possible. So I'm reading his Masnavi alongside the Quran, yeah, and taking this and seeing, what does this mean to me in the contemporary context of the issues I'm dealing with, right, say racism, for example, and I'm writing to Rumi about that. Okay, and this is why I think, and we'll switch tracks in a moment here and just go straight into our PowerPoint. But I just want people to be able to think about this for a minute. So I think what you're doing with this work, and why we'll be excited to see it come out in the world, is this is a really beautiful model for people too.
right? To be able to dialogue with someone who, with a scholar, someone from their own tradition or their own history, who can function the way you've allowed Rumi to function, the way Rumi functions in your mind and your psyche, in your spiritual journey, and to be able to process all this contemporary material with a figure who is, as you say, serves as a metaphor, a scholar, a poet, a kind of enduring, a mystical presence. So it's a really beautiful process, I think, that you're engaged in. And I think once that's out in the world in any form, it will just open all kinds of doors for people to see what is possible, to be able to process their own material through engaging with all this deep, scholarly, poetic, contemporary, and not to forget the uterus is in there too. Like that's what you do, right? So it's just all in there. And that people have permission to talk about all of that, and not to have to cut some of it out or excise some of it or hide some of it away, or this is too deep, or this is too personal, or this is too too private. No, none of that. All these things belong together, and we can talk about them all together unapologetically. So I love that you do that. Keep doing that, please. Okay, so that's a really nice intro, so people have a little bit of understanding about where you're coming from. So let's go into our PowerPoint, and I'm going to talk about the nuts and bolts pragmatics dealing with sort of editors and publishers, and then you're going to speak from your experience and talk about self-care. You good for that?
Yep, that's good.
Okay. All right, thank you. Let me see. Here we go. Here's my slideshow. Start from the beginning. Oops. These things to move out of the way so I can see what I'm doing. Okay, slideshow. Play from the start. Whoops. All right. There we go. Okay, this is we're just going to present some of our ideas in this form, and this will be part of the recording, and you'll be able to access this afterwards because it will be posted on YouTube and on the Awakening Spirituality site. This gives you, we wanted to make sure you had some really practical things to think about tonight. Oops. Let's go to the next slide. Come on. And of course, we'd love for you to reach out to us. This is Meharoona's contact information, her email, website. You can always find me. There's my email, there's my website, and we love to hear from people and be in conversation with you. Oftentimes it takes some time after the webinar to process your thoughts, and that's why we would love for you to be able to contact us when you do. So I'm just going to speak briefly about two aspects, really about before you get ready to publish, and then when you approach editors and publishers. So yes, I want to go public with my story. If your heart is affirming that, and you feel the need to do that, if you feel drawn to that, we're here to say that is fantastic. That is incredible. That I'm one of these people who wants more and more of these stories to be out in the world. We really need to have them out in the world to build kind of living library of human experience. So we really understand what's going on in people's hearts and minds. And so we can speak with each other and build a kind of just, equitable world, because we actually understand what people are going through. So I do want to encourage people, though, as soon as you hit that place, think about building your community in a really smart way and a wise way, because you're going to need that. I think that's critical in spiritual life writing almost more than any other kinds of writing. So you'll see, I'll say certain keywords like find a sympathetic writing group or partner. You might have a writing group or a partner already, that's great. Are the people in that group, or is that writing partner, are they tuned into what you're really trying to say? Do they have anything in their own experience that helps amplify or open up to what you're trying to talk about? Sometimes the problem with spiritual life writing is people just don't have experience across the board, and they can have a kind of benign assent to what you're doing, but can't help you do a deep dive and really get to a richer place in your writing. So if you can find a sympathetic group or partner, that makes a big difference. Same with classes, workshops, residencies, retreats. find supportive versions of that. We like to think that our little webinar is a supportive version where you're coming to a place, you're growing your vocabulary, you're growing an understanding of who else is out there. You feel you can deepen your work without having to hide your identity or squelch things or constantly be translating it for someone else. So that kind of network of support is really important. Then if you go to submit any of your work, try to find publications and contests that are really excited about spiritual life writing. Like, that might be of interest to them. It isn't always of interest. It's beautiful to hear Meharoona speak with such freedom about this kind of work, but often on the receiving end in publications, there isn't necessarily that same degree of openness. So you really need to do your research. Ask for appropriate mentoring, referrals, and introductions. Again, try to find people who can really help you do a deep dive into the kind of work you want to do. They're not squeamish about it. They're not just kind of, giving sort of a pass to it, like, yeah, just do whatever you want. No, they're actually actively helping you grow in that respect. I really encourage you also to give, volunteer, reach out to others who share your concerns, and to read. Anytime I'm going to talk about writing, I'm always going to talk about reading. Read as widely as you can and really deepen your research. So say, for instance, you come from a Catholic background, or you come from a Pentecostal background, or you come from a Muslim background, or you come from an Indigenous background. Your responsibility as an author is you have got to be able to present that world to other people in a way that they can enter it. So you really kind of have to do your research. Yes, you're talking from your own experience, but you really have to make sure that the terms you're using, the language you're using is correct. It's not just colloquial, and that you can that other people can enter into that world and understand it. So it's a very rich, interesting, complicated kind of problem that you're up against. So really what I'm talking about here is building that inner world of trusted conversation partners. And those are people who can help you navigate the stresses of life writing and publishing, because there are stresses that go with it. But if you have that core group of people that you can really trust to walk with you through this, it makes a huge difference in breaking down the isolation. And then to speak from the next phase of it, editors and publishers. I work as an editor as well as a writer, so I like to try to help people understand what those roles of editing and publishing entail. So the writer's job is to, work really deeply on their own material. That's the world you are building. The editors and publishers, however, are outward looking as well. They're going to work with you to help bring the best of your work to the fore, but they're also looking 360 degrees out around them to see what is the public conversation, what is the talent that's out there, because their job is to help move all this material out in the world in a meaningful way. So they're gatekeepers, they are advocates, they are talent scouts, they are midwifing, they are confidants, teachers, coaches, counselors, and entrepreneurs. I didn't add psychiatrists and bankers, but I could put that description in here too. So people who really know what they're doing in this world can move in and out of all of these roles to try to bring really powerful, consequential writing to the fore. Why? Because we live in a culture where books matter, education matters, and if you want powerful material that's going to change the conversation and bring people forward, then you've got to cultivate writers who will take those risks and produce that material. So I would say editors and publishers will support you, provided these things are clear to them. They need to understand where you're coming from. So don't hide the fact that you're working on spiritual memoir, or that's what you really want to talk about. Don't keep that, don't bury the lead, put that out there in a way that's intelligible and that you're proud of it. Own it and address it, and just let them know that that's exactly where your story is from and why you want to tell it. They need to trust that you have processed your baggage. And what I mean by that is we all know if we're talking about really rich, complex things in our lives, that we need to process that material. That's absolutely critical. And that therapeutic nature of that writing is really important. But that sometimes is when the material is raw as opposed to cooked. I'll just use raw and cooked as examples here. The more you've processed whatever baggage that is, it could be, let's say, for instance, you have a rich yoga practice and yoga saved you, quote unquote, from, the cult-like atmosphere in which you were raised. That's great. But if you're going to tell that story, you need to have processed what that experience was like that you came from. So we don't want to just hear the pain story, right? We need to be able to understand or sense the redemptive arc in the story as well. So processing and doing all that. And that's, of course, what your core group, that initial group of conversation partners, can help you with, so that when your writing is ready to go out in the world, some of that is already in place, and writers and editors and publishers know that you're dealing with material that you can handle. You're not going to just be triggered by it or set off by it. And they'll know that by how you interact with other people too. Are you interacting fairly? Are you listening? Are you able to handle people who come from a totally different perspective, different set of beliefs, different traditions, different orientation? What is the quality of engagement you with them? And they want to know, are you committed to the craft? Are you a one-trick pony, or is writing really core to who you are and where you want to go and how you want to develop in the world? And if that's the case, the expectation is you're going to be a good literary citizen. You're going to learn the norms and be in there to, work really hard and work with other people in a very giving way, open, giving, conversational, culture building way. And they're going to want to see that you're building your track record, that you're submitting regularly, you're building your publication record. And, if your other love apart from spirituality is soccer, hey, that's great. If it's cooking, fantastic. If it's gardening, that's great. Write, publish about all the things you care about. And the work of whatever your spiritual life writing is, then will sit in this beautiful embedded way with all the work that you're doing, and will see you as a whole person in a really interesting way. And I think in Canadian culture, I sometimes complain about, or tend to be very hesitant about wanting to hear about spirituality. It can seem like that's a really personal topic and it doesn't really belong in a public forum. For some people, that really is a problem. It just doesn't seem like it belongs. But the more you seem like in a Canadian context, I would say, a regular person, and you have all these different interests and you're conversant about all kinds of things, then here, at least, there's more of a willingness also to listen to you talk about the inner life, or these very private journeys, or inherited stories that have come down through your family, or you're struggling in or out of a tradition, or you're a seeker, you're a joyous seeker. There's just more room for that to be celebrated and elevated if people see you in a rounded kind of way. So that's my rant. Over to you, Meharoona. You have to unmute.
It's unmuting myself. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so one of my big questions has been around, how does a writer plan for self-care? And that's something that I've been moving forward on as I've been writing. So I'm going to specifically speak to what was mentioned a little bit earlier, the Muslimah who fell to earth. Now, this is an anthology and of a collection of 21 Canadian Muslim women. Oh, and we just need to go back. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, 21 Canadian Muslim women, and some of them identify as Muslim and some do not. This collection is very provocative, very personal stories that have been gathered together. And some of the women practice Islam or are practicing Muslims, and some are not. the key is that they're very diverse collection of women, very diverse identities and backgrounds and thinking. So as I mentioned earlier, my writing touches on various themes around racism, sexism, ableism, and I look at from within the Muslim context, but also outside of the Muslim context as well. Given that, I know as a writer that, and it's not just even as a writer, given of who I am in terms of my identity, I have experienced racism in the public, and I will continue to do that, experience it. And coming out as in terms of a spiritual life writer does complicate the kind of reactions I might receive from various people, and I need to be prepared for that. And so for example, when this book came out, it was around 2016, 2017, and without getting into all the details, what was happening in the US, we had Trump running, and what happened, and this isn't anything new, in terms of the anti-Muslim sentiment was on the rise, and the anti-Muslim sentiment has often been there. Anti-immigrant sentiment has often been there. And so that's my professional hat coming on in terms of dealing with these kinds of discriminatory attitudes in the work that I've done in the past. So knowing these things were on the rise, and when this book came out and I started to do readings in different parts of the Lower Mainland, would be Vancouver, Surrey, different areas, New Westminster, Coquitlam. And so I had to deal with various people showing up. And I remember one situation where this man stood up and he yelled after I did my reading, he stood up and he said, "I'm a Trump supporter." That's what he said to me. And I just didn't say, I didn't respond. And I'll get to that why a little bit later in a second. So I didn't respond, I just continued to read. Then I planned a book launch at a university on the Lower Mainland. And given that these situations were going on, and there's also fascist groups were showing up in the Lower Mainland at different mosques on the outside of the mosque, and they were trying to intimidate Muslim gatherings. And so with us doing the book launch, I had to also then keep in mind what we needed to do in terms of protecting ourselves as those of us who were present to be readers and on the panels. And I spoke to the organizers, and we had to make sure there was, I wanted security. I wanted security present at the event, and we needed to do that. So that, because we got wind that there was some people showing up at here and there, trying to rattle some of the conversations that were happening at that time to fight the Islamophobic tendencies that were going on. So with the book launch, we had to have security. And I also then decided that we needed to make sure any questions that were going to be asked of us had to be filtered. So I set up facilitators to gather questions from the audience. So it was pretty controlled. People got pieces of paper and they had to write their questions down and hand it to a facilitator, and the facilitator would filter it and hand it to the moderator. So fast forward again in that time period. Now this is what was happening on the broader sense in terms of what I say outside of the Muslim community. I had to also keep in mind what reaction would come from within a Muslim community. So Let the Quran Speak is a wonderful show. It's a show that comes out of Toronto, and I have a lot of respect for the show. There's some good critical discussions that happen. And the leader of that show, he does book reviews of all kinds of natures of books, and he's a PhD graduate professor out of University of Toronto, wonderful person. he decided to do a review of the book. And out of all the 21 women, he picked on mine. And he, out of the 6 pages of my work that's in this book, he only read 2 pages. And he decided to go on air. It was on air. It's on YouTube. It was on televised on TV. And he said that my writing is anti-religious, a resentment of Rumi, and vulgar. And I was prepared for these kinds of critiques, these kinds of sentiments. That's fine. But what I wasn't prepared for was resentment for Rumi, because Rumi is my love. And I wasn't prepared for the amount of energy and toll it took out of me. And I was also ready to, I had to question things about how do I continue to write? And who's going to be there to support me? And I had to really weigh out, do I fight back or not? And what do I do? And was it really about me and my writing, or was it something more than that? So I sent out an email to all my various network of people that I knew, and it's a diverse range of people from different sectors, like academics, people who work in the government, people who work in business, people who work in academics, nonprofit organizations, and writers of all backgrounds. And I said, this is what's happened to me. How do I, and my only question was, how do I continue writing? And how do I keep moving forward? And everybody responded with, you have to keep writing. And there was a few responses of, oh, this is good, your book, the book will sell. Like, just having this kind of criticism it's a good thing for the book and it's going to sell. So I just had to laugh at that. But one of the key things that a few people had said was to remind myself why it is I'm writing, what's my vision, what's my purpose, and to also think about the pieces that I did write, and whatever language I used was why did I choose what I chose? So I really had to think about that. And one person really wanted me to fight back. And she said, you got to fight, and she's somebody that I admire, and a wonderful professor, retired now, and often spoke about Muslim women's rights in different parts of Canada. And so I said, I took what she said, and I thought, oh, really? What I did was I meditated. I shut everything down, all technology down, everything. And I had to meditate and pray. And meditation and prayer is the place I go to when I'm trying to figure something out in my life, and if I have questions, and I needed to focus on discernment. What's my stuff and what's out of my control? And I spent about a week doing that, and the answer that came to me was, no, this is not my fight. And so I went back to this individual and I said, or to the woman who wanted, my friend who wanted me to fight back. And I said, no, this is not my fight. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to let this go. And she asked permission from me if she could fight on my behalf and advocate on my behalf. And I said that she doesn't need to ask my permission because it's public. And so she can do whatever she wants. So she decided to reach out to him, and she wrote to him, and she basically said, if you're going to critique and do a book review, you need to read the whole book, and you need to read beyond 2 pages of the book. And so he did. And then he came back on air. He took an immediate response, and he reassessed my collection. And he came back on air, and he basically apologized to the viewers. He apologized to the interviewer, because the interviewer was saying to him, you know, I think the author is saying this, and he didn't listen to the interviewer. So he apologized to her. He apologized to the public, to the viewers. He apologized to me, the author, and he apologized to Allah, to God. Now, that for me was a big deal, because it's, from my experience, has been, it's pretty rare to have a religious leader, an imam, to apologize and to be accountable for whatever it is he said. And he asked in the emailed my friend, by my friend to me, asking for forgiveness. And I wrote and said I had forgiven him long ago when I went through my prayers, but I appreciated and thanked him for that that apology. So we can go to the next slide.
Next slide.
And that leads me to what my big takeaway was after this whole situation. It was around patience, be calm, persist, and never give up. And that really came from a lot of my friends who were saying about reminding me about my vision, my purpose in writing, and not to give up in what I was doing. Supports is critical. Sacred practices was something that was very critical to me. So for me, it was prayer and meditation. It might be something for other people, but I think holding space for silence is really important. So it allows a person not to react in the immediate situation. It gives time to think, to tap into one's heart and intuition, and to listen deeply to that internal self. It also allows, that sacred practice allows one to just be open and curious, and putting myself into the shoes of this individual. The guy who said I'm a Trump supporter, now that's a whole other game. Like, if somebody who does that to me and attacks me like that, no, I'm not going to put myself in their shoes. But this imam, what I learned, and this goes to the side where it says choices and negotiate. I was invited to contribute to this anthology, and it's wonderful, and I love the publishers. But the editor, when they approached me, there were limits in terms of the word count. And this was something I learned. I didn't know I could ask things. I didn't know. It was the first time I was asked to contribute to something that was so big for me. And I didn't realize I can negotiate. And so what I'm trying to say is the excerpts doesn't give the full flavor of the entire essay, let's say, that the excerpt might represent. So obviously the reader is going to walk away with assumptions because there's gaps. And so I had to kind of put myself in this imam's shoes. And that to me was a part of my process of being responsible for what I've written, and accountable to that, and to open up a space for forgiveness. It's a two-way street, and so I have to look at that. However, with that said, if there's somebody out there who's going to attack me, that's a different thing, and I'm not going to go into the space of attack. Like, if somebody's going to, I'm not going to respond to that. And that's where I learned, in terms of what I said earlier, the part of negotiation and choices is making sure to ask for a safe space. And sometimes being vulnerable and writing vulnerable pieces means that I need to think about how am I going to be held safely if I'm to go out and read and present somewhere. So safety is really critical. I talked about the sacred practices and discernment. Through those practices of prayer, it allowed me to discern what's my stuff and what's somebody else's stuff and where I can be responsible. And part of that discernment is letting go of my ego. It's working through the ego, working through what I can let go of and what I can be responsible for. I talked about choices and negotiate and reminders. Reminders is tied in with supports. People who are your trusted supports, and trusted also means having people who will challenge you, that you feel comfortable that they will tell you the truth and say, actually, that doesn't sound so good. Actually, that makes no sense. That writing is a piece of crap. Like, that somebody's going to actually, and you feel safe with that person telling you the truth.
Yeah.
I think that's important too. And sources and responsibility are tied together, but the sources, given that I'm a Muslim writer, writing in the context I'm writing, when we started this whole presentation, Susan, you're asking me how Letters Rumi came about. And I was looking for an imam to talk to. I'm looking for spiritual people, leaders to talk to with the questions I have and the challenges I've come across in the context of the Quran and the word of Allah that has been given to me in the Quran. So with those questions comes complexities and feeling unsafe. Meaning, what I mean by that is, if I'm writing about all this, I better have my sources. And if I'm going to be challenged by somebody in the religious community or an imam or somebody saying, you are a sinner, you can't do this because what you've written is not correct, then I better have my sources saying, well, actually, in this part of the Quran, in this chapter and this section, it says this, and boom. So exactly. That's what's important to me. Okay, last slide, I will say is it's a quote from Robin Williams, The Dead Poets Society. It's one of my favorite quotes that I often go to help me keep moving.
There we go.
And it's, no matter what people tell you, words and ideas can change the world. I love that movie. So that's what I look towards in terms of, as a writer, given all these things that I've been through in different situations, what I'm trying to do in terms of my writing is to change the world in some small way, in whatever way I can. But with that comes risk. And that's the reality of it too.
Exactly. That's beautiful. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay. No, that's fantastic. That's absolutely beautiful. And so without any more delay, let's give people some time to just fall into this beautiful space that you've created and take up the writing instruments and just gaze at that open hand. I think there couldn't be a more beautiful image for us to work with. And just take a few minutes to write down what has come up for you during this time. What questions have come to the surface? Where does this take you? What things has this prompted? And just take a few minutes. This will take us a little bit over the time that we normally have, but we want to give you some time to process some of all of this rich information that's come to you, and then we'll have a few minutes to speak as well. So why don't I go ahead and if you need to leave at 8 o'clock, that makes perfect sense, or right on the hour, by all means, please do that. But we will just give you a few minutes about starting now. say 3 minutes left. Let's do that. And 1 more minute. And we're conscious of the fact that we are on the hour. So some people will need to leave. And we're just very grateful that you were able to spend some time with us. And hope you found this valuable and are able to revisit the incredible series of things that came up in this short time tonight, that it's of use to you. And please write and tell us all about it. We'd love that. And for the rest of us, we're going to spend some time, a few minutes, 10 or so minutes, talking together. So thanks for those of you who could stay. And Tina, I'm going to ask you to turn off the recording now. Thank you.